If you look at the DNA of Michael and you look at the DNA from the skeletal remains, there's a match.
Wow.
The DNA evidence points to this being Richard III.
For centuries, the Plantagenet Dynasty ruled England through war, betrayal, and blood. Their reign built empires, but also birthed some of the darkest mysteries in royal history. One of kings who died too soon, heirs who vanished, and rumors of poison, madness, and lies. Historians argued for generations over what truly happened behind palace walls. But now science is stepping in where history failed. Through DNA testing, long-buried secrets are finally being uncovered, and the results changes everything in the most shocking way. The origins of the investigation, when history met modern science. For hundreds of years, the story of the Plantagenet Dynasty was a mix of greatness and mystery. They ruled England for over 3 centuries, yet much of what people knew about them came from old writings filled with bias, propaganda, and superstition. Many of their deaths, illnesses, and disappearances were explained by rumor rather than evidence. But for centuries, no one could challenge those accounts. The tools to do so simply did not exist. Everything began to change in the modern era. By the late 20th century, archaeology and forensic science had grown advanced enough to revisit history with fresh eyes. Scientists could now test ancient remains, date old artifacts with accuracy, and even extract DNA from centuries-old bones. Suddenly, questions that had lingered for generations could finally be answered through fact, not legend. The real turning point came in 2012. A team of archaeologists digging beneath a parking lot in Leicester, England, uncovered a set of skeletal remains. The bones showed signs of a curved spine and brutal battle injuries. After months of DNA testing, researchers confirmed what many thought impossible. The remains belonged to King Richard III, the last Plantagenet king. His discovery shook the historical world. For the first time, science had proven a royal identity that historians had debated for over 500 years. That single discovery lit a fire under researchers everywhere. If DNA could identify Richard III, then maybe it could also solve other mysteries buried within the Plantagenet line. Historians, biologists, and geneticists began teaming up to investigate old tombs, sealed caskets, and even embalmed hearts preserved in cathedrals. With every test, they looked for clues, traces of disease, cause of death, or signs of foul play. Each bone and each relic became a key to unlocking what had really happened to England's most powerful family. Soon, the investigation expanded beyond individual kings. Scientists began comparing DNA across generations, looking for hereditary illnesses that might explain the madness, sudden deaths, and deformities recorded in medieval chronicles. They also started examining the royal bloodline itself. Could modern genetics confirm that every royal heir was truly descended from the Plantagenets, or would it reveal hidden scandals of infidelity and false succession? The answers were going to be both shocking and world-changing. What started as a local dig under a parking lot became a global scientific project. Royal remains across England and France were re-examined. Radiocarbon dating verified centuries-old burial dates. Isotope analysis traced royal diets and movements. Even ancient poisons and metals left inside preserved organs were identified through laboratory testing. Each new result forced historians to question the accuracy of the medieval writers who had shaped England's history for generations. For the first time in history, the story of the Plantagenets was no longer told only by monks, scribes, or Tudor propagandists. It was being rewritten by scientists, through data and evidence. The results were both enlightening and unsettling, peeling back centuries of myth to reveal a darker, more human truth about the men and women who once ruled England with an iron fist. To grasp the full scale of what these discoveries revealed, one must first understand who the Plantagenets were and why their story still grips the world today. The Plantagenets, the dynasty that built and broke empires. The Plantagenets ruled England for more than 3 centuries, from 1144 to 1485. Their line began with King Henry II, a powerful ruler with vast lands that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees in France. And it ended with King Richard III, whose body would vanish for centuries until it was found underneath a modern parking lot. Between those two men lies one of the most dramatic family stories in European history. It was a dynasty that built kingdoms, shaped nations, and destroyed itself through endless ambition. Under the Plantagenets, England transformed from a small island kingdom into a major European power. They created laws that still form the foundation of British justice today. Henry II introduced reforms that gave rise to common law and the modern court system. His sons and grandsons carried England's influence beyond its borders, launching crusades and claiming vast territories across France. Yet their victories often came at a terrible cost. Their wars drained the treasury, rebellions tore families apart, and betrayal became a recurring theme in their bloodline. The Plantagenets were not just kings and queens, they were warriors, schemers, and empire builders. Richard the Lionheart became a legend for his bravery during the Crusades, though his reign was short and violent. His brother John became infamous for losing French lands and forcing the signing of the Magna Carta, a document that would shape democracy for centuries. Later kings, like Edward I and Edward III, turned England into a military powerhouse, waging fierce wars in Scotland and France. But those same wars sowed seeds of ruin as the endless fight for power weakened the realm. Their marriages were as strategic as their wars. By wedding into other royal houses, the Plantagenets connected their bloodline to almost every major throne in Europe. French, Spanish, and even German rulers could trace links back to them. But this wide web of relations also created confusion and conflict. Different branches of the family began to claim the same crown. The result was one of the bloodiest civil conflicts in English history, the Wars of the Roses. For 30 years, cousins and brothers slaughtered each other for control of the throne. The White Rose of York fought the Red Rose of Lancaster, and the Plantagenet family tore itself apart. When Richard III was defeated at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, it marked the dynasty's end and the rise of the Tudors. The Tudors would rewrite history, portraying the Plantagenets as villains, tyrants, or cursed figures whose greed had doomed them. But centuries later, that image began to crumble. Modern science started to expose what the Tudor writers had hidden or twisted. Behind the stories of corruption and madness were rulers who had suffered from real diseases, poisons, and genetic conditions which were all now traceable through their remains. The Plantagenets shaped the map of Europe, the laws of England, and the very idea of monarchy. Yet their dynasty ended in mystery and blood, leaving behind unanswered questions about how and why so many of them died. The mysteries begin with death, strange, sudden, and suspicious deaths that DNA finally solved. Suspicious deaths and hidden killers. In medieval England, sudden royal deaths were often accepted without question. Disease and infection were common, and few dared to suggest murder when kings or princes died. But modern science has begun to reopen these ancient cases, revealing patterns that look less like coincidence and more like calculated assassination. The Plantagenet dynasty was built on ambition and rivalry, and behind many of its early deaths may have been a hidden hand. The first mystery DNA solved was that of Richard the Lionheart, one of the most famous warrior kings in history. In 1199, while besieging a small castle in France, Richard was struck in the shoulder by a crossbow bolt. At first, it seemed like a minor wound. Chronicles say he even joked about it as his surgeons removed the arrow, but only days later he was dead. Officially, the cause was gangrene, which was a deadly infection, and for centuries, no one questioned that story. Then, in the 2010s, scientists examined the preserved remains of his heart, kept in Rouen Cathedral. Chemical testing revealed traces of plant toxins and metallic residues, including lead and arsenic. These were not consistent with infection. They suggested poison, possibly smeared on the arrow or introduced into his body afterward. DNA had just revealed that Richard's death that was once seen as bad luck now looked more like a murder disguised as a medical tragedy. More than a century later, another powerful king met a strange end. Edward I, known as Longshanks, had built a fearsome reputation as the conqueror of Wales and the oppressor of Scotland. In 1307, while marching north to crush a Scottish rebellion, he suddenly fell ill and died before reaching battle. Chroniclers described it as a simple sickness that struck him down in camp. But when his remains were later tested, traces of mercury were found in his bones. Mercury was used in medieval medicine, but the levels were high enough to raise questions. Was he overtreated by careless physicians or deliberately poisoned to speed his death? His son, Edward II, inherited the throne soon after, and not everyone was happy about the timing. The DNA evidence now points to the possibility that his death may have been politically convenient for factions within his own court. Then came Henry V, one of England's most celebrated kings. Henry was the hero of Agincourt, and he seemed unstoppable until 1422 when he died at only 35. The official cause was dysentery, which was a common disease among soldiers. But doubts have lingered for centuries. His sudden decline came after a campaign in France, during which he had humiliated several powerful nobles. Modern science points out that certain poisons, like arsenic or lead acetate, can mimic the symptoms of dysentery while leaving little trace. Although Henry's remains have not yet been DNA tested, the pattern fits a dynasty where political murder often hid behind medical explanations. Each of these cases shows how easily medicine and murder overlapped in the Middle Ages. With no modern diagnostics and no autopsies, almost any death could be explained away as illness. But today's scientists are uncovering chemical residues in royal relics, exposing how poison may have been a silent weapon of power. The presence of metals and toxins in several royal remains suggests that assassination through slow poisoning may have been far more common than anyone once believed. Scientists now treat these royal deaths like modern cold cases. Every preserved relic, every fragment of bone is being catalogued and tested. Thanks to DNA, centuries-old murders are becoming solvable crimes one chemical trace at a time, but not every death left evidence behind. Some Plantagenet kings' murders remain unsolved, even after 700 years. Unsolved murders. The Vanishing Kings. Not every death in the Plantagenet line ended with a body or a clear explanation. Some kings simply vanished, erased by politics, betrayal, or royal silence. For centuries, historians relied on conflicting reports, rumors, and propaganda to fill the gaps. Now, with modern science re-examining ancient remains and forgotten documents, these cases are being reopened. One of the biggest mysteries is that of Edward II, one of England's most controversial monarchs. His rule was marked by rebellion, humiliation, and personal scandal. In 1327, after being forced to abdicate by his wife, Queen Isabella, and her lover Roger Mortimer, Edward was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle. The official story says he was murdered there, tortured and killed in a brutal way to ensure there was no doubt about his death. But over time, that story began to crumble. Centuries later, a document known as the Fieschi Letter surfaced in Italy. It claimed Edward had escaped his captors and lived out the rest of his life quietly as a hermit. Historians have debated its authenticity ever since. Some believe Isabella and Mortimer faked his death to secure power, while others think Edward truly died in prison and the letter was a forgery. Without confirmed remains, science has no way to prove which story is true. Yet, the possibility of his survival still fascinates researchers today. Next is Richard II, another king who lost his throne and his life in suspicious circumstances. Deposed by his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, who became Henry IV in 1399, Richard was locked away in Pontefract Castle. Within months, he was dead. Chronicles from the time give conflicting accounts. Some say he was starved to death by order of the new king. Others claim he was murdered outright. When scientists examined what were believed to be his remains in the early 20th century, they found signs of cranial trauma, which was possible evidence of violence. But the tests were inconclusive, leaving open the question of whether he was killed or left to die slowly. Richard's body was reburied in Westminster Abbey, yet even with DNA, doubts still linger about whether those bones are even his. The most haunting case of all is that of Edward V and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York. known forever as the Princes in the Tower. After their father's death in 1483, the 12-year-old Edward and his brother were placed in the Tower of London by their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Shortly after, Richard declared himself king as Richard III, and the boys disappeared. The official records fell silent, and no one ever saw them alive again. In 1674, 2 small skeletons were found buried beneath a staircase in the tower. They were believed to be the missing princes, but the technology of the time couldn't prove it. Today, scientists are preparing for a possible DNA comparison between those bones and confirmed royal remains. If the match is found, it could finally solve one of England's greatest mysteries of the missing princes. These unsolved deaths form a chilling pattern, a dynasty that erased its own members to secure power. Modern science and DNA now breaks that silence. Advanced imaging and genetic testing can now identify victims even from centuries-old fragments of bone or hair. Each analysis reopens a file once thought closed, proving that no secret stays buried forever. But not every death was sudden or violent. Some seemed to rise from within the family itself. The Plantagenets faced illnesses that returned generation after generation, almost like a hereditary curse. Mysterious illnesses and the Plantagenet curse. Rumors have surrounded the health of the royal bloodline of the Plantagenets. Kings once known for their strength and command began to fall to mysterious diseases that struck both body and mind. To those who lived at the time, it looked like divine punishment. But to modern scientists, it looks more like a hereditary condition that passed quietly from generation to generation, shaping the course of English history from within the royal veins. Edward III was once celebrated as one of England's greatest kings. He ruled during the early phase of the 100 Years' War and was known for his sharp mind and fearless leadership. Yet in his final years, that same king became a shadow of himself. His energy faded, his speech slowed, and his behavior turned erratic. Courtiers described him as forgetful and withdrawn, no longer the warrior who once led armies into France. Historians long assumed this was old age, but new medical analysis suggests a deeper cause. Some experts believe he suffered from a degenerative neurological disorder, such as vascular dementia or Parkinson's disease. Others think he may have had an inherited immune or metabolic condition that attacked his body as he aged. Whatever the truth, his decline marked the first visible sign of what many later called the Plantagenet curse. His son's story was even more disturbing. Henry VI, who seized the throne from his cousin Richard II, faced rebellion and unrest throughout his reign. But his worst enemy was inside his own body. Soon after becoming king, Henry developed a painful, disfiguring illness that caused severe rashes, swelling, and lesions across his face. His skin cracked and bled, and he sometimes collapsed during public ceremonies. Chroniclers at the time claimed it was punishment for betraying his cousin. But modern doctors reviewing the symptoms proposed several possible diagnoses: leprosy, severe psoriasis, or porphyria. This is a rare inherited disorder that affects the blood and can cause both skin damage and nerve pain. DNA researchers now think porphyria could have run in the Plantagenet family, possibly passed down from Henry's royal ancestors. Henry's son, Henry V, seemed to escape the illness and went on to win legendary victories like Agincourt. But his own son, Henry VI, was not so lucky. Henry VI's rule was marked by long mental breakdowns. He would sit silent for months, unable to speak or move. Witnesses said he often failed to recognize his surroundings and spoke to people who were not there. This strange condition mirrored the mental illness of his French grandfather, King Charles VI, known as Charles the Mad. DNA scientists studying royal family genetics have found striking similarities between their symptoms. Some modern psychiatrists believe they suffered from a hereditary neurological disorder. Others again point to porphyria, which can cause sudden psychosis and muscle weakness. The match between their family histories and recurring symptoms supports the theory of a genetic fault carried down through the line. Even the mighty Edward the Black Prince, the eldest son of Edward III and one of the most respected warriors of his time, was not spared. After his campaigns in France, he began to lose weight rapidly and suffered from constant fatigue and fever. He became bedridden for long periods and died before ever taking the throne. For centuries, historians blamed dysentery from his military campaigns. But new genetic research, including studies on preserved royal remains, has raised new theories. Scientists now believe he may have suffered from an immune system disorder that caused chronic inflammation and organ damage. This would connect his illness to the same hereditary weakness that affected his father and descendants. When viewed together, these stories form a striking pattern. Across generations, the same signs reappeared in the form of unexplained rashes, mental breakdowns, and slow physical decline. Historians once treated them as separate tragedies, but science now sees them as connected threads and a chain of inherited illness that quietly weakened the most powerful dynasty in medieval Europe. Today, researchers continue to study preserved tissues, bones, and historical records to trace this hidden mutation. Advanced DNA sequencing is now being used to determine whether a specific genetic defect ran through the Plantagenet line. If confirmed, it could rewrite the medical history of one of England's greatest royal families. Their blood carried both greatness and decay that shaped wars, dethroned kings, and may still hold clues to royal genetics. But while sickness haunted their bodies, scandals soon began to stain their bloodline, and new DNA evidence is now exposing just how deep that corruption ran. Succession scandals and broken bloodlines. By the late 15th century, the Plantagenet dynasty was collapsing under the weight of betrayal, scandal, and suspicion. Centuries of war, disease, and internal conflict had already weakened the family, but what truly destroyed their legacy came from within their bloodline itself. The more scientists and historians studied their past, the clearer it became that some of England's most famous monarchs may not have been true Plantagenets at all. Edward IV, who ruled from 1461 to 1470, and again from 1471 to 1483, was seen as a towering, handsome king who restored peace after years of civil war. But during his lifetime, rumors spread through the court that Edward might not have been a legitimate son of the Duke of York. According to this rumor, Edward's mother, Cecily Neville, had an affair with an English archer named Blayborn while her husband was away fighting in France. Edward's striking height and features, unlike those of his supposed father or brother Richard, fueled suspicion. Even his cousin, the powerful Earl of Warwick, used this claim to challenge Edward's right to the throne during the Wars of the Roses. For centuries, this story was dismissed as political slander. But in recent years, modern genetics has forced historians to take another look. In 2014, researchers studying Y-chromosome DNA from living male-line descendants of the Plantagenet family found something shocking: a non-paternal event, meaning that somewhere in the direct male line, an illegitimate child had broken the sequence of true Plantagenet blood. The results did not match what the official family tree claimed. While scientists cannot pinpoint exactly where the break occurred, Edward IV's rumored parentage became one of the main suspects. If Edward was indeed not the biological son of the Duke of York, it would mean every monarch descending from him, including the Tudors, and even later royal lines, might not carry true Plantagenet DNA. This discovery turned what had once been medieval gossip into a modern genealogical mystery. The next king, Richard III, carried the Plantagenet name to its bloody end. History remembers him as the cruel, twisted villain of Shakespeare's play, accused of murdering his two young nephews to claim the throne. But for centuries, his real story was buried along with his body, which vanished after his death in 1485 until it was discovered in 2012. Richard's remains showed a curved spine confirming he had scoliosis, but no evidence of the grotesque hunchback described by Tudor propaganda. Forensic tests revealed multiple sword wounds to his head and body, showing that he died fighting bravely in battle, not as a coward hiding behind his army. DNA extracted from the bones matched that of modern relatives descended from Richard's sister, confirming beyond doubt that the remains were his. This discovery not only cleared part of his name, but also deepened the mystery of the Plantagenet bloodline. The same DNA studies that confirmed Richard's identity also strengthened the theory that the royal male line had been broken somewhere before or after his reign. In other words, while Richard was genetically proven to be a Plantagenet, some who claimed descent from his ancestors may not have been. When Henry VII defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth and founded the Tudor dynasty, he ended the Plantagenet era but also began erasing it from history. Henry's claim to the throne was weak, traced through his mother's side and an illegitimate branch of the Lancastrian family. To secure his position, Henry married Elizabeth of York, Edward VI's daughter, uniting the two rival houses. But behind the scenes, he launched a quiet campaign to wipe out remaining Plantagenet heirs. Modern researchers trying to trace the Plantagenet DNA have found missing pieces in the royal lineage. Whole generations vanish from official records, and several burial sites that could confirm genetic connections remain undiscovered or off-limits. These findings suggest that Henry VII's efforts to secure the Tudor dynasty may have included suppressing or destroying evidence of the Plantagenet genetic legacy. For centuries, his propaganda reshaped how the English monarchy remembered its past, and it worked. Only with modern science has the truth begun to surface again. Genetic genealogy now paints a far more uncertain picture of royal descent. Some supposed heirs to Plantagenet blood may in fact have no biological connection to them at all. Others, living today as ordinary citizens, could unknowingly carry the authentic royal DNA. These discoveries have unsettled long-accepted narratives about rightful succession and royal legitimacy. What began as an attempt to solve ancient mysteries has ended by rewriting centuries of royal history. DNA has reopened graves, exposed secrets, and revealed how fragile the foundations of monarchy truly are. The Plantagenet dynasty may have fallen more than 500 years ago, but its secrets are still unfolding, not in castles or battlefields, but in laboratories where scientists continue to test the bloodlines of kings. What do you think about what the DNA revealed? Comment down below.